Good afternoon and welcome to Healthy Habits Eat Well webinar series, taking place every Thursday from March 10th through April 28th from 12 to 12:50 p.m. We're so excited to have you all here with us today and so pleased with the turnout. We are expecting over 300 attendees. I'm Julie Chabdi, Health and Wellbeing Program Manager at the USC WorkWell Center. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and spend the next 50 minutes with all of you. A few housekeeping items before we get started. As always, we encourage you to stand if you're able to at any time and stretch during today's presentation. So feel free to get up, move around, shake it out. Your audio is muted to minimize any background noise until we open it up for Q&A, but we encourage you to use the chat function and the Q&A function to ask questions and make comments. This webinar is also being recorded and will be archived on the Healthy Habits Eat Well page that you used to register for the series. So stemming from the success of last year's Healthy Habits webinar series, where we had over 500 registered for each session, we're now celebrating National Nutrition Month in March and in April, collaborating with campus partners for a spin-off called Healthy Habits Eat Well. We all know that access and availability of healthy food and beverages play a very important role in our overall health and well-being. The link between diet and health has been well documented in scientific literature for many decades, and there is continuously growing evidence showing that food and beverage environments conducive to healthy dietary patterns can help individuals achieve and maintain good health and reduce the risk of chronic diseases. So the purpose of this series is to provide you with tips, resources, and support to improve health and quality of life through nutrition and healthy eating habits. Here's a look at our 8-week nutrition education program sponsored by the WorkWell Center in partnership with registered dietitians and nutrition experts from clinical nutrition at Keck Medicine USC, the Keck School of Medicine, USC Athletics, USC Hospitality, the USC Leonard Davis School of Gerontology, USC Student Health, and the USC Transplant Institute, Keck Medicine of USC. Today's session is on food and mood and mindful eating. We hope you'll join the other sessions as well. And just a reminder, for those who attend all 8 sessions, we'll be entering you into a raffle at the very end. And then at the end of today's presentation, we will also have a raffle for 2 prizes. So let's get started. Today's topic is a great one, and it's on food and mood and mindful eating. It's my pleasure to share the agenda with you and introduce our speakers for today. We'll cover mindful and intuitive eating, listening to our bodies, and then food and its impact on mood. Then we'll have some time for Q&A and a preview of next week's session. So now I'd like to introduce Laura Kaufman, outpatient clinic dietitian, Keck Medicine of USC, and Lisa Statner, outpatient oncology dietitian with the USC Norris Cancer Hospital. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on your lunch break today. My name's Laura. I'm one of the outpatient dietitians with Keck, and I'm going to start us off talking a bit about mindful and intuitive eating. And so I wanted to actually start off with a question for you all today, and just kind of ask you guys how many of you or who all has ever followed any type of diet in your past. Now, this doesn't have to be a full diet like keto or Whole30, even any time you felt like you were ever making significant changes to your diet or restricting certain foods. I see a lot of answers coming in.
The answers are coming in. While they're coming in, Laura, I just wanted to point out that it's a little hard to hear you.
Sure.
So I don't know if it's the audio or maybe if you can maybe just talk a little bit louder.
Yes, I can. Is that any better?
Slightly.
Maybe if my computer a little closer too. Is that better?
Slightly. Yeah, just keep that in mind. Some people are saying no.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, I think the poll has pretty much ended. We'll share the results.
All right. So as you can see, about 82% of you all said yes, and about 18% no. So we'll kind of keep that in mind. All right, Julie, you can go to the next slide. All right, so I want to kind of start off with, let's think back to that time. For those of you who have ever followed any type of diet, how did you feel while you were on that diet? And also, how did you feel once you went off that diet? Some of what we'll talk about today is going to involve dieting and different kind of eating patterns. And so I wanted to just start off with kind of bringing those feelings to the forefront of your mind. Next slide. And so now let's think about how often when we eat, do we actually stop and ask ourselves, are we hungry? How hungry are we? There's a lot more reasons besides physical hunger why we might actually eat, especially if we're on a diet. We're likely thinking about food all the time, simply because we are restricting ourselves from certain foods and what our body needs. So let's take a look at the different types of hunger that we might feel. So we have our physical or our more biological hunger. This is what comes on gradually. We might feel our stomach growling. The more hungry we get, we might feel weak or shaky. Likely we're open to eating a wide variety of foods. We'll feel satisfied and likely stop eating when we are full. And this type of eating is unlikely to trigger an emotional reaction because we are eating really to fulfill our body's need for energy. Now, on the other hand, we have another type of eating that's very common, and we have our emotional hunger. This is hunger is likely comes on much more sudden. We might feel bored, sad, lonely, or anxious. Probably we're going to have a very strong craving. There's going to be a particular food that we want in this instance. Probably going to continue eating even once we're past the point of being full. And unfortunately, this type of hunger and eating may be followed by feelings of guilt or regret. And when we do indulge in this kind of emotional hunger, sometimes it can lead to something called a snack accident. And I'm sure we've all done this. We are watching a movie, maybe we grab a bag of popcorn or chips, we're distracted. Before we know it, we've gone through half the bag. And so we're really eating more out of boredom or distraction and using food to satisfy a need other than nutrition for our body. And so when it comes to mindful eating, really starts off with being able to distinguish between these two types of hunger. And so we may hear the words intuitive eating, mindful eating used interchangeably. So let's look at what really is the difference between these two, and is there a difference? So when we talk about mindful eating, we're really talking about being present during our meals, paying attention to our body's signals of hunger, of fullness. We want to try to eat mindfully rather than mindlessly. We're using our senses during our meals to really smell and taste our food and to enjoy it. We want eating to be more of an experience without distractions. We want to eat slowly and really eat foods that are going to satisfy our body's biological need for food rather than emotional. Intuitive eating takes this a little bit further. We're still honoring these signals that our body has for hunger and fullness to kind of determine how much we want to eat. We're still seeing food as energy for our body, but we're also acknowledging that diets don't work. And it's really about creating a relationship with food where we find that all foods can be eaten, kind of restoring this trust that we maybe have lost surrounding food and reestablishing a satisfaction around mealtime and foods. And so the two of them really go hand in hand, and we'll kind of talk about both today. So let's take a look. What does the research say about intuitive eating? Well, it's found that intuitive eaters have higher what's called interoceptive awareness. And so this is our body's ability to perceive our internal signals within the body, such as hunger and satiety. And intuitive eating works to either enhance this awareness or to remove the obstacles that might be preventing us from perceiving and responding to these sensations. Oftentimes, those are things that are in our head. They might be in the form of rules that we've established around foods, beliefs, thoughts, things that we kind of see externally or hear, which can kind of create this confusion between our mind and what our body really needs. Intuitive eating is also found to be associated with greater body appreciation, improved mental health, greater life satisfaction, an unconditional regard, self-regard, and optimism. greater motivation for exercise, weight maintenance, as well as higher HDL and lower triglycerides. And so on the other hand, what do we kind of see that the research shows us about dieting? Well, we know that post-dieting binges occur in about half of individuals who go on a diet. Majority of individuals will regain the weight that they've lost. And unfortunately, up to 2/3 will actually gain more weight than they had originally lost. And then we see this kind of yo-yo dieting or on-off kind of diet weight cycling is actually an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, inflammation, high blood pressure, and insulin resistance. And so here are just some other comparisons for you guys between eating with a more mindful approach as opposed to a more diet approach, where mindful eating is more flexible, food is really our fuel, and we accept all foods as fitting into our diet. Whereas dieting is more rigid. Food is kind of a reward on certain days. We might be more motivated by external cues and more reliant on trends and peer pressure. And so why don't diets work? Well, as we saw today, I think it was a little over 80% of all of us have been on a diet at some point. And so some of this may kind of resonate with you. Diets can cause you to feel you have little trust in yourself surrounding food. If you've already eaten your calorie limit for the day, we might feel that even if you're still physically hungry, you don't deserve to have any more food. Diets are often preceded and followed by binging unallowed foods, causes increased social withdrawal, feelings of failure, lowered self-esteem. We also see that a large percentage of participants who follow any type of diet might progress into any form of disordered eating, which might be really any type of irregular behavior around food, whether we have anxiety around eating, guilt after we eat, certain food rules, and some might even develop into an eating disorder. We also know diets are not sustainable. And so that's really where intuitive eating comes in, and what it's based on is that if we want these kind of long-term improvements in our health, we need more of these lifestyle changes. And so what does dieting actually do to our body? Well, our body views dieting as short-term starvation, and it doesn't know when we're going to be fed again. So we kind of have these processes that are our body's way of helping to store fat so we have more reserves for next time we go into this starvation. So our body doesn't know when it's going to be fed again. Our metabolism decreases as it's trying to adapt and conserve energy. It also causes a change in some of our brain chemistry. It causes our brain to increase our hunger and our cravings and actually diminish our satiety cues. And lastly, it can change our body shape. If weight is lost rapidly, we may be losing muscle. And oftentimes when that weight is regained, it's in the form of fat. And so for those of you who've ever taken a psychology class, you may have seen this in the past. This is a framework that was developed by Abraham Maslow about the different stages of motivation, and kind of based on the idea that we can't meet these higher level of our needs until we meet our more basic needs. So we may not be able to feel self-esteem or a sense of strength or security unless we've met our more basic needs, including food. Kind of think about how you might feel at the end of the day. Maybe you haven't eaten for 6 or 7 hours and you're famished. When we're given that first opportunity to eat, or if we're ending a diet, that hunger can feel uncontrollable. And what we might perceive as a lack of willpower is really just our body's normal response to kind of fueling that most basic need. And so one last thing I wanted to mention before we kind of dive back into intuitive eating is a research study that was done during World War II. The purpose was actually to look at how to treat starvation, but they used 32 healthy men. And what they did is for the first 3 months, the men just ate normally. And then for the next 6 months, they cut their calories in half, but they were to exercise to an amount where they were burning twice as many calories. And so what they found during this starvation period was that metabolic rate decreased by 40%, participants' weight dropped by 25%, and muscle mass decreased by 40%. The men had increased cravings. All they kind of thought about was food. They started guarding their food, even being afraid that other people might take it. They developed personality changes as well outside of their eating behaviors. They got more irritable, more moody, more depressed. Then when they did this refeeding period where they were then allowed to eat again at will, they kind of continued with some of these unhealthy behaviors. They used binge purge behaviors. Their hunger was more intense and harder to satisfy, or they even had trouble reading their own hunger cues. And it actually took about 5 months for these participants to kind of normalize their eating back to normal. But unfortunately, some of these behaviors continued. And so this may be a very extreme example, but for anyone who's ever restricted or gone through something like this, you may be able to relate to some of these things. So let's get back to intuitive eating and really paying attention to our hunger cues. And this is where being mindful comes into play. If we're distracted while we're eating really quickly, we're not paying attention to our body signals. And so if we look at this chart, we can see the different phases of hunger and of fullness. So over on the left, where we have 0 to 2, this is where we might feel shaky. We might have a hard time focusing. We really want to try to eat before we actually get into this stage, because this is where we are more likely to overeat or choose less nutritious foods. That 2 to 4 range is really that sweet spot where we want to eat. We can feel the hunger in our stomach. We're starting to think about food. Then we have that neutral phase in the middle, that 4 to 6, which is while we're eating. Then when we get to 6 to 8, this is kind of when we want to stop eating. We're feeling satisfied. We're feeling comfortable. And if we don't stop eating, we might go into that 8 to 10 category where we might feel uncomfortably full. Our stomach might feel stretched, even nauseous. And so if you have a hard time gauging, think about trying to avoid going longer than 5 hours without eating, and just kind of checking in with yourself frequently to assess your level of hunger. Next slide. And so we want to do these kind of frequent check-ins when it comes to being mindful when we eat. As we're getting hungry, let's ask ourselves, am I hungry? First off, how hungry am I? Is this a good time to eat? And also, what food do I want? What type of food is going to satisfy my taste buds? Then while we're eating, think about, how does the food taste? Be present and be mindful and eat slowly. As we're starting to finish our meal, kind of check in with yourself. Are we still hungry? Are we starting to feel satisfied? Or are we only really eating because food is still physically in front of us? And then lastly, after we eat, how do we feel? Did I eat a good amount of food to feel comfortably full? And so when we look at intuitive eating, there are a ton of different principles that have been established to kind of adopt this type of mindset. The first one is really about rejecting that diet mentality, like I mentioned, and just recognizing that diets don't work because they force these drastic changes and they can really be not sustainable in the long term. Second, we want to recognize our hunger, really kind of try to eat at a good time and feed our body with adequate energy. Make peace with food, allowing ourselves to eat all foods and knowing that when we restrict ourselves, all it does is kind of make that food more taboo and make us want it even more. Also goes along with number 4, challenge the food police. I'm sure we all have like these heads on our shoulders that are eat this, don't eat this. And it's kind of like getting rid of that mindset and just accepting that all foods can fit within a healthy diet, within a diet in general. And 5th, discover the satisfaction factor. Choose foods that are going to satisfy our taste buds and refinding enjoyment in meal times. Maybe taking a bite of food, close your eyes, eat slowly and actually taste our food. Sometimes we eat so fast we don't even taste our food and then our food's gone. And so this is where we can kind of compare a dieter to an intuitive eater. Say we're at a party, there's pizza, all we want to do is eat the slice of pizza, but we're not allowed to have pizza, so we don't eat it. Then we go home and we're so hungry and we try to really satisfy this craving that we had for pizza. So we might eat thing after thing after thing, and then end up eating more than we might have eaten if we had actually just had the slice of pizza in the first place. So just running through these last 5 principles. Number 6, feeling our fullness. Back to that diagram. Eating slowly, stopping eating when we're feeling satisfied rather than when we're full. Cope with our emotions with kindness, recognizing that there are different reasons for why we might eat. And if we're noticing that we're eating related to our emotions, trying to find some ways to actually satisfy those needs in other ways, whether that's yoga or going for a walk or calling a friend or family member. Number 8, respect our body. Trying to avoid being overly critical of ourselves and comparing ourselves to others. Moving with the benefit of actually choosing exercise that we enjoy doing, that we might like to do on a regular basis, rather than something that just burns a lot of calories. And lastly, honoring our health with gentle nutrition. Choosing foods that, yes, provide healthy nourishment for our body, but also that we enjoy eating. And we're not going to develop a deficiency or become unhealthy all of a sudden just from one meal. It's really about kind of the habits that we form and what we do over time, rather than striving for perfection. And if we do move into a kind of more intuitive eating approach, recognize that it's a process. Start by kind of paying attention to those hunger or those fullness cues. Try to be present during your meals. And if you do have a setback, I think all mistakes, no, I would just say mistakes, but we learn from everything. Just kind of recognizing that it might take time to actually feel trust around food again. And remembering that you are in charge, don't have rules or restrictive nature around certain foods. The more that we are in control, hopefully we'll have less of a need to kind of rebel to get that control. And here are just some last additional tips in terms of kind of being more mindful, maybe sit at the table to have your meal rather than in front of the TV. Make cooking and eating an enjoyable experience. Next slide. Putting your food actually on a plate rather than eating out of the bag, or eating out of a takeout container where we're not really sure how much we're actually eating, and we might just keep eating because it's there. Trying to actually identify different ingredients in our meals, take smaller bites, put our fork down. Lastly, take a breath and actually relax and enjoy our meal. And so thank you. I'm going to turn it on over to Lisa.
Great, thank you so much. That's so interesting, although now I'm hungry. I'm Lisa Statner. I'm one of the outpatient dietitians over here at Norris. And let's go ahead and get to the next slide. First slide. All right, so Laura was talking about how our emotions can affect how we eat. So we're going to flip that over and talk about how food can actually affect our emotions or our mood. So I have a quick disclaimer. We're not really delving into the topic of nutritional psychiatry. That's a whole other area. And we're not really going to talk about specific psychological conditions. So here we're just talking about mood. And what is mood? It's just a temporary condition that we feel day to day. So, if you're experiencing any depression, anxiety, we do recommend that you seek the advice of a mental health professional. All right, that out of the way, we have a quick little video that we'd like to share.
Okay, let's see if this works.
Cross our fingers.
It's not coming on.
Okay. Oh.
Okay, now the little thing is turning, so let's see
There we go. Okay.
Okay, I think it's coming on. Ooh.
All right.
You may
not vaping. You thought that's what I was doing.
Skip the
There
ad.
we go.
Have you ever noticed yourself feeling grumpy when hunger strikes? The relationship between food and mood is complex and can be affected by many factors. Understanding this delicate relationship can help set you up for success in balancing both mood and dietary intake. It's normal to crave foods high in calories, sugar, and fat when stress or depression strikes. The obstacle here is that foods full of fat and sugar increase the likelihood of depression and anxiety. These foods, eaten in hopes that it will help you feel comfort, may in reality cause a negative cycle. These cravings don't have to be avoided at all costs, just balanced. In the same way that some foods can negatively impact mood, there are foods that can boost mood. First, fruits and vegetables. Studies show that increasing fruit and vegetable consumption can increase happiness, life satisfaction, and well-being. Second, omega-3 fatty acids. Low omega-3 fatty acids have been associated with several mood disorders, so it is important to keep omega-3 levels high. Omega-3s can be found in foods like fish, flaxseed, walnuts, and canola oil. Third, dark chocolate. Yep, you heard that right. Dark chocolate has properties that stimulate the brain and result in a good mood. Just remember, moderation is always important. Food choices can affect your mood, and your mood can affect your food choices. To help balance your mood, stick to a well-balanced diet that includes fruit and vegetables, omega-3 fatty acids, and even chocolate if you desire.
Okay, thank you. And we will get to our next slide here in a sec.
One sec. Okay.
All right. So what research has found that actually a bad diet can lead to a bad mood. And I love this picture. It's sort of reminds me of what Laura was talking about a snackadent is. This is a perfect example. And FYI, that is not me laying on the couch. So there was a great study done by Penn State not too long, a couple of years ago, I believe it was in 2018, and they gave the students, over 400 students, a score, a nutrition score, and they looked at high calories, high saturated fat, and high sodium. And what they found was a higher score was related to a negative mood for up to 2 days. And I thought that was pretty interesting. So kind of makes sense. All right, next slide, please. All right, so what is a healthy diet? So a lot of different people will sort of say what a healthy diet is, especially with all the crazy diets that are out there now. So we're really looking at what the guidelines for Americans, the dietary guidelines, and the new ones are out 2020 to 2025, and the definition really of what a healthy diet is. And remember, it used to be the 80-20 rule. Well, now it's tightened up a little bit. It's the 85-15 rule. So basically 85% of your diet should be healthy and 15% for the fun foods. And you know how we look at the fun foods, that would be extra saturated fats, added sugars, alcohol, things like that. Things that don't really provide nutritional value for us. Okay, next slide. So caffeine. So I had to touch on this a little bit, even though coffee we wouldn't really consider a food, although there are some polyphenols and some phytochemicals in coffee. But I love this slide here because this is exactly what happens to most people, right? We have our coffee in the morning, we feel perked up, and then we might feel a little anxious. We might start getting tired again. We say, I'm not going to drink so much in the morning anymore. And then by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we start feeling bad again, have some more, and it is a vicious cycle. What's interesting about caffeine, and so, you know, different beverages have varying amounts. Coffee really has the most amount of caffeine, but the half-life of caffeine is 5 hours. So if you have a grande from Starbucks, coffee, just a plain coffee, that's about 16 ounces of coffee. It has about 250, 270 milligrams of caffeine. 5 hours later, you'll have about 130 milligrams still in your system. So if you think of a traditional saucer cup of coffee, of drip coffee, that's about 200 milligrams of caffeine. So 130 is still quite a bit to have in your system. And then you want to think about what time you're going to bed. So, you know, caffeine, although we can have a quick pick-me-up with it, so, someone made a comment about coffee. So I was just talking about the size, the grande size, just of plain coffee there, without the milk. But, you know, some of the negative effects of caffeine can be anxiety, nervousness, increased blood pressure, which is a big issue, and also insomnia, which can lead to weight gain. So be mindful of where caffeine is coming from. Tea does have a nominal amount, probably about half the amount of drip coffee. A lot of our energy drinks have caffeine in there. Some medications even, a lot of the medications for headaches will have caffeine in there. And yes, even chocolate. So we'll touch on that at the end. Okay, next. So sugar. So that was one of the things that I really wanted to touch upon that was in the video there. So what we're talking about here are added sugars. So not the naturally occurring sugars that you might see in lactose or fructose. And I like this graph here because it shows that there's really no consensus as yet as to how much added sugars are okay in the diet. So we've got the FDA recommendations, the American Heart Association, and the World Health Organization. I really like the American Heart Association because they're a little bit stricter. And especially you can see with infants and toddlers, they're just saying avoid the added sugars altogether. Adolescents, less than 25 grams. Adult women less than 20 grams, and adult men less than 36 grams. So, you know, that's still quite a bit, as we'll see in the next slide. All right. So here's just sort of an example of what a typical day would be. And this is just in a child's day of where added sugars might be sneaking into the diet. And so you can see in the 80-gram day, that's an enormous amount of added sugars. And even in things like the pasta sauce, there will be added sugars. So not even just the obvious, like the Pop-Tarts or the candy. And even in a day that's cleaned up a little bit, you can see there's still quite a bit of added sugars in there. So a lot of the yogurts have a lot of added sugars. Even in the wrap, there might be a little bit, maybe in a dressing, that sort of thing. So really being mindful there. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so some of the effects of sugar, of added sugars, again, can really make us irritable, have those highs and lows, feeling tired. I think that's, you know, pretty notorious. And then what happens? We go for the coffee and the caffeine. Hunger, actually, sugar can stimulate your appetite. Or it could have the reverse depending on the person. So it could actually curb your appetite. So if you're in a situation where you're needing to gain weight or not lose weight, that can backfire for you. Poor concentration, definitely notorious. So a lot of students, you know, might grab a candy bar for quick energy, but then their overall concentration skills are lowered. Headaches, very common again. Migraine sufferers are familiar with this. And then the mood swings, the up and down. All right, thank you. I find this shocking every time I look at it. And, you know, how many labels have I looked at in my career? A bazillion. But every time I see things like this, I'm still shocked because I think, how can this be legal? And look under the carbohydrate section there. And we're looking at added sugars, which is 55 grams, which is basically all the carbohydrates in this product. So that's really where you want to look on your label there, under the total carbohydrates, and you'll see added sugars. And the total sugars typically are inclusive of the naturally occurring, like fructose and lactose. So 55, that's quite a bit. So, and with a lot of these sweetened drinks, they have the caffeine as well. So that can really add to mood swings. All right, so let's move to the next one. All right, so we have a quick poll here. So how many or how often do you all eat fast food? And so would it be every day, just once a week, 3 times a week, or never? And we'll wait till everybody's results get in. And nobody's fessing up to every day. Or we just have a very healthy group here.
Let's share the results.
All right, let's see. All right, once a week. I think that's very honest. You know, actually most Americans eat fast food 1 to 3 times a week on average. So, you know, overall, I think we have a pretty good, pretty honest group here. All right, so some other stats about fast food that I think is sort of interesting. So lunch is the most popular for fast food. Men actually eat more fast food than women. And the age group that eats the most is actually 20 to 39-year-olds eat the most fast food. And also keep in mind, and the reason why I put the poll up here was that fast food is higher in added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium, some of those things that can really affect our mood. And one thing that I didn't really address in here is about sodium. And, you know, one of the things with sodium or salts, added salts, is that we tend to retain fluid, and that can just make you feel bad, you know, when you're bloated. So that can also contribute to your mood. So, all right. And the other thing with fast foods is that they will often push out some of the healthier foods that might make you feel better. And so that's another way to contribute to your mood. So, all right. So let's look at the things that make us feel better. All right, so the omega fats. So the omega fatty acids, that's DHA, EPAs, and ALLs. And really what you want, the ALLs are coming from your plants, especially like the walnuts, the flaxseed, etc. The DHA encompasses all the fatty acids, and your best sources are from fish. And you can see from this graph how well salmon is, and the bluefin tuna, et cetera, as far as great sources. And, you know, granted, not everybody cares for fish. So that's where having some flax, having some walnuts, having those in your diets are great as well. So the dietary guidelines recommend about 8 ounces of fish per week. And so one serving is really considered 3.5 ounces cooked. So a couple times a week. Of fish is really ideal. So there was a study, and I think, I'm not sure if we have a link for it, I think maybe we do, on looking at what's better, just eating fish on its own or foods that are high in the omega fats or the supplements. And what they found, which was really interesting, was, and this was related to mood, was that eating fish actually had a significant difference in elevating mood, and the supplements really had no effect there. So things always go back to foods are always the best way to get our nutrients and all those extra phytochemicals, and often it's because of the absorption. Someone just had asked real quick, what's better, avocado oil or olive oil? And I'll say just quickly before going on, they're both excellent oils. So a lot of it is a taste preference. So let's go on to the next slide. All right, so actually there's been a lot of studies looking at fruit and vegetable consumption and as far as how we feel. And the studies are really showing overwhelmingly that feelings of happiness, life satisfaction, and well-being are linked to an increase in fruit and vegetable consumption. And we do have some links for some of the studies there. It always goes, I'm such a pusher of fruits and vegetables. So, and again, on the flip side of eating fast food, when we eat more of the fruits and vegetables, it helps push out some of the foods that maybe aren't quite as healthy. All right, let's get to chocolate, what everybody wants to know about. So there is a link in increased mood and chocolate consumption, although the jury's really still out. Is there a pharmacological effect, or is it just a sensory effect? You know, we're sort of like Pavlov dogs when it comes to chocolate, I think. So no one really knows, you know, which it is, but it does seem that there is a mood enhancing effect with chocolate. But you want to be mindful about what kind of chocolate that you're eating. So we all know that the darker chocolate seems to have more of the polyphenols, less added sugar, but the darker chocolate also is a little bit higher in caffeine. So dark chocolate in an ounce can actually have up to 12 milligrams of caffeine. So the milk chocolate actually has a little bit less, but more of the added sugars. So really what I recommend is not having the dark chocolate too late. And just on a personal note, I figured this out the hard way because I used to, or I still do on occasion, get the dark chocolate covered almonds as a snack. And for a while I was eating them late at night and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't sleeping. It took me a little while to put 2 and 2 together. But anyway, so what it's worth, that's my tip on the dark chocolate. So, moderation, of course. All right, so this is kind of a fun little thing that you can do. So a mood tracker, since everybody's physiology is different, how we react to foods is different, and you can just track for yourself to see how certain foods affect your mood. And I highly recommend putting in the time and place, and that kind of relates back to what Laura was talking about, how you're eating your food, what's going on surrounding that, and then what you're eating and how you're feeling in general. And I think you'd be surprised at the results that you get with that. All right, and then lastly, the Mediterranean diet, it always goes back to that. And so time is really showing over and over again that the Mediterranean diet is great in relation to lowering inflammation, decreasing risk for heart disease, decreasing risk for cancers, and really has everything in there. It's, meets the dietary guidelines and more. And so that's about it. So thank you. I think we have quite a few questions here.
Yes, we have about 6 minutes. Thank you so much, Lisa and Laura. We have about 6 minutes left and about 6 questions so far. So I'm just going to shoot them off. And if one of you can answer quickly, that would be wonderful. Someone asked about olive oil and if that's a source of omega-3 fatty acids.
Any of the plants are higher in the ALA fats, omega fats, which actually sort of convert into the DHA and you need a higher dose. But the answer, I guess, would be yes. Fish is the best, to be honest.
And eating salmon 4 times a week, is that bad?
If you're eating wild salmon, absolutely not.
Great. Okay, what is the best way, this is probably for Laura, what is the best way to integrate some of the general good practices you mentioned earlier and avoid getting into the negative side effects like obsessing over food, overeating afterwards, while fasting for religious reasons? Any comments on that?
And I think that's one of the things that intuitive eating does try to target is those kind of obsessive or negative behaviors that we might have. So I think thinking about some of those mindful eating approaches can be helpful. Eating slowly without distractions, but also it's almost like exposure therapy. Thinking about maybe a type of food that you have been avoiding or has been considered bad and buying it and having it at home, and almost showing yourself that having this food around and knowing that if I eat it now, I can still have it later, can kind of help back off that sort of restrictive or unhealthy nature we might have toward the food. And in terms of fasting, I would say similar, listen to your body. When you're breaking that fast, choose foods that are going to satisfy your taste buds, as well as that are kind of nourishing for your body, and listening to your fullness cues, and eat slowly and stop eating when you're getting to that kind of comfortable level of fullness.
And other types of fatty fish besides salmon?
So tuna is a great choice. On that slide, I listed a lot of the other fish on there. Mackerel was the highest. I don't know how often we eat that here. Yeah, so most fish will have it. It's just varying degrees.
If someone is allergic and cannot consume omega-3s like seafood and walnuts, are there other substitutes?
Well, flaxseed is another good source. That's the one that comes to mind first. Again, I'd kind of defer back to that list there.
Great. In terms of caffeine, is it better to drink caffeinated tea or coffee?
That's a good question. So, decaf coffee has about 2% caffeine in it as well. So it's not completely caffeine free. And you also want to look at how is the coffee decaffeinated? Was it chemical decaffeinated or water decaffeinated, which would be my choice. So you really want to look at how sensitive you are to caffeine. Everybody has a different threshold as far as how much they can handle. And that's where that food and mood log might come in handy for you, just to see how you feel. Some people don't tolerate it at all and really need to go to herbal teas, something like that, that's completely caffeine free.
Question about sugar. So we know sugar is bad, but what about something like date syrup as a substitute? It has sugars, but no added sugar. Still the same result though. What about chemical or artificial sugars with 0 calories and 0 carbs?
So personally, especially because I do work with cancer patients, I'm not a fan of a lot of the chemical sweeteners. Some sweeteners that are allowed in this country are not allowed in other countries. That always makes me a little suspicious, and vice versa. And some can have some side effects, so that we don't, digestive side effects. So, if you are using sweeteners, I do prefer some of the more natural ones, like the date syrup, agave, maple syrup, local honey, things like that. And keep in mind there are calories there, but I think, if we're looking at general health, I do prefer the real thing.
Does cooking versus eating raw like sashimi change the omega-3 content of fish?
I have no idea. What about you, Laura? Do you know on that one?
I don't know either. Sorry.
That's okay. Good question though.
Yeah, very good question. I'm going to have to look that up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. There were a couple questions about meal plans. I'm getting meal plans for like the Mediterranean diet, low calorie meal plans. Any resources for that?
One resource I like a lot for kind of monitoring our caloric intake is My Plate, or like the Healthy Eating Plate. And so it's a method where you don't really have to be counting calories or kind of measuring foods, but we're really looking at what proportion of our food groups do we have. Having 50% of our plate being produce, fruits, and vegetables, which are lower in calories and fat and sodium. And then we have the other side of our plate kind of split between our starchy food or our grain and our protein. And so following that type of pattern and trying to just focus on these kind of whole grains and beans and lean proteins and lots of fruits and vegetables naturally can kind of help lower your cholesterol, your calorie intake, cholesterol levels. So that's one resource that I find kind of helpful to give you still freedom in making the choices that you want to fill that plate, kind of helping with calorie control.
And we have time for maybe 2 more quick questions. What are some safe recommended tuna options low in mercury?
Well, that's a good question. There are some brands out there, and off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you, but I know some of the grocery stores out there, like Sprouts as an example, they do carry lines of lower mercury fish. You can go to the EPA website. I believe it has been updated as far as looking up mercury content of different foods. Oh, thank you. Someone just said Seafood Watch. That's also an excellent one, and they have an app that you can put on your phone. So that it's hard, to really, if you want to eat tuna every day, it's really not recommended right now because of the mercury, unfortunately. So, but there are some lines out there. But yes, Seafood Watch is a great resource.
And last question, before we run out of time, if you can make a quick comment around intermittent fasting, does it make our body think we're starving ourselves?
I would not say intermittent fasting necessarily puts you into that starvation mode. We're really having these refeeding periods when we're following an intermittent fasting. Either we're restricting the amount of time we're eating, or we're kind of having these alternating days where we are restricting our calories, but then we're having this refeed period. And so that's really what is allowing us, I would say, to kind of not necessarily enter that starvation mode, having these kind of intermittent restriction in calories and then followed by the refeeding.
Great. Thank you so much for the questions, and Laura and Lisa for answering all the questions coming in, and a great session. Lots of wonderful information. We'll send everything out to you all afterwards. And I just wanted to briefly share our next session next Thursday on eating sustainably, presented by Michelle Katz and Patrice Barber of USC Student Health. And then for those of you who are a part of the Vitality program, you'll be receiving 50 points at the end of the series towards your point total. Questions, you can contact USC Health Plans. Thank you so much. We will be sending a survey to get your feedback, along with all the handouts, presentations, as well as the presenter contacts. So now for the raffle, we have 2 meal plans that we will be raffling off. So Suzanne, if you want to share your screen, let's just pick our raffle winners. Mary Alto. And Marissa Vega, congratulations. If we missed any questions that was not addressed, we can send out the answers with the follow-up email after the webinar, because we're out of time and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being part of EatWell. See you all next week.
Thank you.